So welcome to the Coaching Culture podcast. My name's Jo Wright, and today I'm joined with the fabulous Nichole McGill-Higgins from Change His Life. Welcome, Nichole.
Thank you, Jo. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
It's lovely to talk to you. And today we're going to be talking about inclusive leadership and what does that really mean, and how can leaders and managers really help their teams and themselves thrive in an organisation, knowing what inclusivity means. It's a topic that is touched on, talked about, avoided, you name it, inclusivity and diversity. But we're talking inclusivity and really want to get under the skin of it. And we want to go into territories today that are going to help leaders and managers in their roles to know how to be. It's about how to be as a leader. But before we do that, and I know we're going to have a great conversation, tell us a little bit more about yourself, Nichole, and explain to the listeners today, why you're here talking about a subject that you're so passionate and knowledgeable about.
Yeah, no, definitely. So in terms of business-wise and professional-wise, I've always had the lived experience of diversity and inclusion, kind of whatever that means, but we're delving into that a little bit more. And being a female, being a black female, I have the lived experience of what does it mean to be diverse? What does it mean to be feeling like you're included, et cetera, et cetera. However, I became the co-chair of the race network at my last organisation, which was the CIPD. And I would say that's when I really catapulted into this space. It's things I've done beforehand. I've always worked with grassroots organisations, charities, and being quite patriotic, to be fair. However, in terms of the business workspace, becoming the co-chair for the Race at Work group, that's when I really realised the importance of the inclusive mindset and the importance of diversity and inclusion, the 9 protected characteristics and that kind of world, which, to be fair, I didn't really know existed, because I find that HR departments can be a little bit hidden. So people don't really understand what they do. They pay, you get your sick leave, but there's so much more to HR. There's so much more to learning and development. And with saying that, being inclusive and having that mindset shouldn't just sit with HR. It should be an organisation agenda, and everybody should be a part of that conversation. So after working in that area, in that remit, and understanding others, other protected characteristics, so not just race, not just gender, I then kind of started to speak more about it. Although I was petrified to be a public speaker, absolutely petrified. But my CEO, Peter Cheese at the time, or he's still the CEO of the CIPD, really pushed me into public speaking. So he was our sponsor for the group. And we'd have all these different functions just to kind of educate the organisation. So we had these discovery hours and we would speak about being inclusive. What does it mean to have race, and kind of those kind of agendas, like, why can't people talk about race? Why can't people talk about racism? Why can't people talk about LGBTQ, disabilities, age? So we used to have these really juicy conversations at work. And Peter used to do his bit as a sponsor, and then he would say, over to Nichole, and I'd be like, so what are we doing? We had a conversation about this. I wasn't meant to be talking. But then I realised that I did have something there in terms of the way that I do speak and my passion. So I coined this thing to say, my passion's stronger than my fear.
Brilliant. I love that.
And it was almost speaking up for people who couldn't speak, and not just for a woman or for somebody who was black, just people who wanted to speak about these things, who were curious, but didn't want to be reprimanded for asking questions or saying the wrong thing. And if I was to put £1 for every single conference that I've done or every single workshop that I've done where somebody has said, Nichole, I just don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to offend anyone. It's honestly, Jo, it's just, that's the starting point. Dialogue, conversation, as simple as it sounds, it's about that. And people, you may have seen, all over LinkedIn and all over social media, to be silent is to be compliant. And lots of people like, well, Nichole, I don't agree with that because I just don't want to get it wrong. I genuinely don't want to offend anyone. So how do we educate that? How do we break down that barrier? So I then, I started my own consultancy earlier this year, so in January. So I ended up leaving the CIPD, which I have a lot of time for, a lot of love for, I have to say that, and started to really speak about diversity and inclusion with a race lens. As my journey's gone on, where are we now coming into August? I've learned so much in the last 7 months. And for me now, Jo, it is about an inclusive mindset. No voice should be unheard. And it's also about belonging, equity and equality.
So belonging, equity. So you've just said so much in such a short space of time there. So much richness already. So you talk about inclusive mindset, you talk about belonging, equity and equality, and you talk about saying the wrong thing. Now, we often hear and see the words diversity and inclusion, yet we're talking inclusivity. Just share with me what that means. I know what I think it means, but what does that mean? Because it feels like if you're inclusive, that naturally means everybody and therefore diverse. But is that right or wrong? Tell me what it means. Why do people say D&I versus just I?
Well, you see, there is and that's a really, really good question, a powerful question. And also, when our listeners do listen to this, I would like them to leave comments around what does inclusion mean to you?
Oh, lovely.
What does inclusive mindset mean to you? And what does diversity and inclusion mean? Because I think there's a lot of mixture there. It's almost like when someone says, I'm a marketeer. Okay. So what do we mean? Do we mean advertising? Do we mean social media? Do we mean... There's so much things underneath that bracket. Yeah. So for me, looking at diversity and inclusion, we have this saying that says diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. So that's kind of what you'll hear lots of practitioners say. And for me, it's really more around, well, it's not really being invited, because if you're not going to have my music or my type of food or even the venue, depending on what time you're going to have it, do I even drink alcohol? Do I eat meat? Am I vegan? I want to be included in the planning. I want to feel like I belong and I want to dance and I want to say yes. So yes, it is good to be invited. It is good to be asked to dance. But what's the backstory of all of that invitation? We need a bit more to it than that. It's not just black and white, excuse the pun. It's not just that. There's a lot more, and we're not just labels. I'm not just a woman. I'm not just a black person. I've got so much other things which are attached to me as a person. I'm a grandmother. I'm a wife. I love the Disney Channel. I'm dyslexic. There's so much other things that I love to do, which when you break down and remove that label, we're people. We're human. And that for me is where we need to be going. And I think diversity and inclusion has become so clinical, almost cliche. And as soon as you hear D&I, lots of people think LGBTQ, race, gender, disability. There's a whole lot more to that. And also when we speak about the 9 protected characteristics, that's very UK centric. And you've got so much global organizations now. So I've done group coaching with a global senior leaders who are from all over the world. It means that the Equality Act 2010 for the UK means nothing to them because it doesn't operate in their country. Yeah. And if they're seconding people to different parts of the world, that now doesn't make sense because they're not protected. So we need to be talking more globally, more internationally, and more inclusively, and bringing all of those voices into that melting pot.
So it feels, I mean, I am no expert on human rights, etc., but it feels more about humanity, inclusivity, as opposed to D&I. It feels it's broader than diversity, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's much broader.
Much broader. It's being human and welcoming everybody for who they are. And respecting and loving them for who they are and what they bring to the party and the dance.
And also, and this is why for me, I mean, it's quite controversial for me because diversity, inclusion, and saying D&I or IND, however people want to put it, is not really my niche or not where I'm going. As I said to you in the conversations we've had before, Jo, it's about belonging, it's about equity, it's about equality. So it's human, but we have to respect and understand people's lived experiences and their journeys because our journeys are completely different. So yes, we can sit here and it can sound quite fluffy. Oh, it's about humanity. It's about being human. Of course it is. But the unfortunate thing is that we know people are being discriminated against because of their sexuality, because of their gender, because of their disabilities, whether they be invisible or whether they be visible. And we know that out of all the data that's being collected, people who do have disabilities are the least to say that they have them in an organisation because of the trust and they don't want to feel penalised. So disabilities is another area that has to be looked at and people need to understand and do that breakthrough of, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I want to make sure that I'm accommodating everybody. And when you look at COVID, we're able to do that because if you've got somebody who's pregnant, you've got more people who are staying at work for longer and not taking mat leave because they're at home. So they're able to do their job. It wasn't because they couldn't do their jobs before, but commuting was an issue, potentially, of course. And then if we look at people who have got mobility problems, they can probably now go for jobs because they're sitting at home and they're comfortable in that space. So when we talk about being inclusive, it's not just the protected protected characteristics that I'm referring to. I'm referring to everybody's needs, and somehow leaders and organisations have to have that safe space that people feel that they can say what those needs are. The assumptions are not being made. Because if you treat, there's this other saying that I saw, it said if you treat your employees that they can make a change, they will.
They will make a change. It reminds me of many years ago when, in an organisation, I used to always get the last slot of the day for the one-to-one with my line manager. And yet the office was 2 hours away from where I live, because it was a very remote working job. And I used to always get the last slot of the day. So it was often 3 till 5 as an example, as a one-to-one. But anybody who had kids who had to go and pick them up from nursery, quite rightly, kind of got the earliest slots. But that meant I was the one walking in the door at 7:30. So my evening, I didn't then suddenly have the energy to go to the gym or anything. I because I didn't have a child, I got the latest slot of the day. It wasn't about, well, what have you got any plans tonight? Or obviously if I had a specific, but I couldn't because, and it's because I didn't have kids.
Yeah, and yes,
it felt weird. It used to just feel a bit
fair. It didn't feel fair. And I think we're allowed to say that. But if you say that, it seems like, oh God, here she goes whining again, She doesn't really care about the others who've got to pick up kids, because you do have to pick them up at a certain time. Yeah. But then as a manager, what you could potentially do is maybe split the one-to-ones over the week or over the month.
Totally.
So it's within working hours. So it's understanding that somebody could have a course that they need to get to.
Yeah.
I'm doing a course at the moment that starts at 6 p.m. So as soon as I literally finish work, I've got to get to that course. If I was in the office, I may not even be able to do that course.
Correct.
So as we kind of were discussing beforehand, is that I feel that even with this hybrid working, that's really a prime example of how organisations are almost being forced to be inclusive. Yeah. Because now you're probably asking your employees questions that you wasn't asking before. And because of this trust factor, and we've gone through just such a mayhem in the last 18 months with the pandemic, we've had to have trust. And trust is super, super important. And we do talk about psychological safe space. We talk about psychological safety around, do employees feel like they can say? And if they can't say, why not? Yeah. And all of this fits into the kind of tool of being inclusive, of understanding your people. We're dealing with human beings at the end of the day. So I don't know why we're so clinical and so robotic about it.
And I never would have, I never would have said anything or complained, because I actually, also prioritise that person who had to go and pick up the kids. I was like, well, they've got that. I will not do something this evening because I've got so my work kind of came first, but I didn't then think of any other needs that I may have had. It just became how we did things and accepted. And I kind of felt that because I didn't have kids, I didn't have a right to have a voice, to be honest. Right. I thought, actually that is fair, because, that other person does have to go and do that. They have. So I don't know. I think the world's changing, and I think we are recognising that actually, it is about everybody as an individual rather than certain individuals. It's about everybody, isn't it? About what do they want, and asking employees, not just in the annual employee engagement survey. There's something you've said that I'm intrigued to understand a bit more. Equity and equality. Those words are very closely aligned, but what is it?
You know something? Well, when I first heard equity in this space, I was like, is that not finance? Is that not money? Exactly. I just thought, this is money. What's it got to do over here? Yes. So, I was completely clueless. But there's a quote that a friend of mine told me around equity and equality, because I'm obsessed with it. And I think the best way to describe it is to basically say, equality is giving everybody a pair of shoes, and equity is making sure that they fit. So they have to go hand in hand. So we could sit here and say, yes, everyone's got an interview, but have you looked at, do you have a ramp for somebody who's a wheelchair user? Have you thought about where the toilets are placed? Have you got somewhere where somebody could get a glass of water in case they have to take their tablets at 12 o'clock and the interview's at 12:15? Are you thinking holistically around everyone? You can't think of everything. And it sounds like a minefield, like, well, how the hell am I meant to know this? But you can start having the conversations. I was just going to say, it does sound like a minefield. And leaders and managers have got so much to think about in an organisation. They've got such a, it's a privileged role, but it's also a pressured role. So the two go together. They're responsible for people. They're responsible for the well-being of their teams and their performance of their teams. And there's so much they have to juggle. What's the best way for them,
if you were just giving them a little piece of advice, what are the best way for them to feel confident and comfortable? They've got it all. They've got it in the bag. They know what they've got to do or say or how to be. Because I hear and see and feel that a lot of people are frightened, as you said before, of saying or doing the wrong thing. So their hearts are in the right place, but they're saying or doing the wrong thing is actually stopping them being real or themselves. So what is it? What would your advice be, Nichole?
For larger organisations, because sometimes I feel that these conversations can completely miss out your small to medium-sized enterprises.
Okay.
Because you may have an organisation that's just 4 people,
and
there may be somebody that I shouldn't say somebody that's more inclusive than the other, because that doesn't particularly exist, but there could be something, that mindset would still exist even with 4 people, because we're talking about people, right?
Yeah.
In a larger organisation, I would say that be explicit around what diversity and inclusion means to you, or what belonging means to you, or what inclusivity means. If that's what you say you're doing, be transparent and be communicative and involve your whole organisation. You can potentially have an employee resource group, like I was the co-chair of, because what you will find is that people have passions around things.
Yeah.
And if you're going to say, look, we want to get this right, and when you sound believable and the organisation starts to trust you, you'll be inundated with help and people will give you their opinions. We know that. That's why social media is so prominent, because we've all got something to say. So if you're a larger organisation, if you're a smaller organisation, you could just do topic of the week and just pluck something out of the news that happened. It could be something around the Olympics. It could be something around the Norwegian girls who decided to wear shorts and they were going to be fined because they didn't want to wear bikini bottoms. Talk about it. So it doesn't have to happen to you to matter to you. So some people will be like, well, it's nothing to do with me. But you don't know. I mean, I remember I did a session, and one of the ladies said to me, look, Nichole, I work for an elite car company who their head office is based way up in the sticks, very, very white middle class. None of our staff are of colour. We've got a good mix of gender, yes, but we don't have anybody who we know who's LGBTQ, etc., etc. And I said to her, but that particular car that you guys produce, most of your customers are Arab or from Africa. So you would still need to understand cultures.
Definitely.
So just because you're not seeing it in your office, and then you're human as well, because discrimination is learnt behaviour, not work behaviour. So you can't decode everybody that walks through your offices. So if you're thinking, okay, how do I become inclusive? What do I do? Dialogue is the first thing. What is your intent? Why are you trying to change your organisation? Why are we talking about this in the first place? Be very explicit with that. Because, as I said, you can't decode everybody who walks through your doors. However, you can say we're an organisation of zero tolerance and everybody matters. Everybody counts. And we want everyone to have that space to be able to feel like they count. So there's a thing that you may have heard as well is bring your whole self to work. Bring your whole self to work. And what does that mean? Like, what's your whole self? Like, and again,
I'm guilty of saying that, to be fair. I'm definitely guilty of saying people expect to bring your whole self to work. But I know what I mean by it.
What does that mean when you say that?
So what I mean is be yourself. Be your genuine, true, authentic self. Because, and what I suppose I've experienced personally is, and it really struck me when I coached somebody who's gay. And I coached them many, many years ago. And they told me that when they first joined the workplace, somebody took them to one side and said, look, I wouldn't be telling anybody this. It'll probably hold you back. So this is a number of years ago. So this isn't the here and now, but this isn't, crikey, I've been in my career since 27 years now. So it's a number of years ago. Nonetheless, the times have changed. But I remember, and I was coaching her at the time, and she didn't tell anybody until after her honeymoon. And suddenly she got the pictures out, and the team for many years had assumed that said honeymoon was going to be with her male partner, and it wasn't. And the team were mortified, horrified, devastated that she'd not brought her whole self to work. She'd kept it back, and it had really inhibited who she could be at work. It definitely, she wasn't thriving. She had this giant thing on her back that she wasn't telling people about. And the minute she told them and showed them the wedding pictures and the honeymoon pictures, it was like this boulder had just been taken off her back. And she was free as a bird to be who she liked. And it was that. And I'll never forget, that story really stuck with me. And that to me was Wholesale. She was not, she literally, the minute she arrived at the work door, 50% of her, or of kind of her and her partner had gone. That was it. She was this person at work, or actually 100% of her wasn't being at work because she couldn't be real. And I'll never forget that. And I remember the feeling when she told me, it just sent tingles down me, but not in a good way. I was horrified and mortified for her. And I just thought, this is so unfair. But the liberation she felt when she brought the Wholesale was just night and day. Absolutely. And do you know what? I'll never forget that story. And I just thought, this is so awful. And so I've definitely had experiences throughout my career of different people not bringing Wholesale to work and how much it's held them back. That did not help her. I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about.
And exactly that. And I think there's too many of those stories. We talk about that we have to fit in. We talk about, this cultural fit as opposed to a cultural add. Yes. What can you add? Why should I mean, for example, I've got tattoos, I've got piercings. You've got some organizations that don't allow any of their employees to have tattoos or piercings because of the stereotypes attached to that. So I think when it comes to having an inclusive mindset, and because, as I said before, it's learned behavior, not work behavior, it starts with self, Jo. Yeah. We have to realize, why are we being stereotypical? Why are we judging that person? Yeah. And for my lived experiences, I used to straighten my hair to try and fit in, just to make sure that my hair was straight, And now I'm natural. I rock my afro.
You rock everything, Nichole. You rock everything. Every time we have a video call, I go, wow, you look amazing. But apparently I'm not allowed to say that anymore. I'm not even allowed to pay people compliments. I got told the other day. I was like, oh. Really? About is it? Yeah, no, you can't.
I'm going to get into so much trouble.
You look nice, or don't say that. I'm like, oh, really? It's just the natural. I seriously have to sort this out, but I can't help it.
And this is it. People don't want to bring their traditional foods into work because you've got people saying, "Oh, what's that smell?" And it's understanding what gaslighting is. So there's certain kind of terminologies in this space that I think is important for people to know and identify and see how they are part of the problem. Yeah. So gaslighting, for example, I could say, you know what, Jo, somebody just talks about my hair and it's really, really upset me. And you'll be like, oh, don't be silly, Nichole, they didn't mean it like that. So I'm experiencing something and you're downplaying it to let me second guess how I think I'm feeling. And I think everybody, again, people listening, have you ever been gaslighted? How did that make you feel? How did you overcome it? So it'd be good if people could put things in the comments around that, like, how did you feel? And we're talking about people here. I'm not asking females, I'm not asking males, I'm not asking anybody who's people. How did it feel when you were being gaslighted? And then the other thing is the microaggressions. Like I would get people saying, oh, Nichole, is that jerk chicken you're eating? Just because my heritage is Jamaican. And I'm like, I do like a bit of jerk chicken, but I do like a nice old curry as well. And I like a kebab too. And I do love a steak, So why would you just assume that I have rice and peas and chicken per se? And it is those... Banter can be quite dangerous, I think.
Oh, banter. Banter can be there's a fine line with banter.
Fine line with banter. And again, because we're talking about so much here, so I hope we're not confusing our listeners because they're thinking, this is great, but what do I do? So we'll get back to that in a second. And I can give a prime example, and it wasn't particularly banter, but it's just an example of how things can play out. So when I was the co-chair, my other co-chair, he was Chinese. Yeah. And what we used to do was celebrate like Jamaican Independence Day, Chinese New Year, Diwali, all those kind of things we used to celebrate at the CIPD. And this particular year, I said to him, I was like, oh, we're going to celebrate Chinese New Year. Can you bring in some Chinese music just to play while everyone's having their lunch and stuff? Because when I did Jamaica Independence, I had like the Bob Marley album playing throughout the whole of the CIPD. So I was like, yeah, let's have some Chinese music. And he looked at me and he went, well, I don't know if I can do that, Nichole, because I don't listen to Chinese music, I listen to rap. And I was like,
oh, there you go.
And because he knows me, he knows I didn't mean anything by it. However, if somebody he didn't know potentially could have taken offense to that.
They've made an assumption that clearly he would be listening to Chinese music.
So
this is where we talk about it, Nichole. This is the you're the most inclusive person ever. So kind of like, this is where saying the wrong thing, how do you break down that into
I'm always saying the wrong thing, like always, like forever saying the wrong thing. And because I'm one of the board of directors on the Rape Crisis Centre, so for RAFAC, and we're actually doing our anti-racism strategy at the moment, and we're also doing the transgender strategy. Yeah. And as most people or anyone knows around the ball space, it's very feminist. Yeah. And I'm learning about transgender, so I'm a transgender ally, and I have so many questions, Jo, like thousands of questions, and I just don't want to say the wrong thing. But my whole life or my profession or my business is around helping people not to say the wrong thing. Just be open and honest. Just literally say and explain your intent. So, for example, one thing that we always hear about is, where are you from? Okay, I'm from London. No, where are you really from? Now, there's no harm in asking me where am I from. It's the really, because you just gaslighted me. You've always made me feel like, well, I've just told you I'm from London. Why are you asking me where am I really from? Is that because I'm of colour? You just think I shouldn't be from England because I've just said I'm from London. So that's one kind of, I think, is a really live example, and lots of practitioners do talk about this really. So the word really. The word is really, because it's almost like you're not believing me.
Really, with a question mark at the end.
Really, like, so no, not London, but where are you really from? So I've
still from London.
Yeah, exactly. So it's almost like, but somebody could be asking me where am I from because I've got, like, I always hear a sexy accent. Like, if I hear a French accent, I'm like, oh my gosh, where are you from?
Where are you really from?
And they'll be like France. And I'll be like, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to learn French. I'm genuinely curious. Yeah. I'm genuinely curious. But people may not want to ask because I don't want to be called racist or I don't want to be called sexist. But people have these curious questions. Children do. Like, my grandson, he's like 4, and his aunt's a Muslim, and he was like, why do you wear that? Are you not hot? And I just look at him and I close my eyes in shame. I'm like, did you want to not be so abrupt? He's like, no, Grandma, I'm just asking. And it's such an innocent,
curious, genuine question.
Could you imagine that in the workplace?
No.
So we've somehow...
So tell me then, that's a great example of, because you keep talking about not saying the wrong thing, but how do we know how to say the right thing? And when do we stop saying the right thing? Do you know what I mean? It's like flip it on its head.
Yeah, and the thing is, we spend so much time saying what's the right thing and what's the wrong thing. We overthink all of that. How about just having a conversation?
Just have a chat. And I suppose it's about your intent, isn't it? It's about, in your heart, are you, your intent being positive and you're wanting to do the right thing, have the right dialogue. And
yeah, exactly. Just say more. So, for example, going back to me being a transgender ally and literally knowing nothing about this space. So I've been connected with quite a few phenomenal transgender women. And I've just asked them, and I will literally say, I know nothing about this. I just don't agree with certain things which are happening in the feminist space and kind of where I am and what we're trying to do. And how do I navigate that? How do I do that? Teach me.
Help me.
Tell me. And I do have, sometimes I fumble and I don't know if I should say transgender men, transgender women, because I don't understand it all. But there's no harm in saying I don't understand. But when you think about it, think about the psychology of people. We don't want to look like we don't know. No. And that when you think about it in the class or even at uni, and the teacher will say, or the lecturer will say, does everybody understand? Half of the room does not understand, but as soon as you do that, one person puts their hands up, then you'll get all these other questions, this whole group think that we have.
Absolutely.
Because we don't want to feel embarrassed, and it's human nature. So again, it does start with self, and you can break those barriers. You can be a leader and say in a group, I don't really understand what you just said there. Why would somebody want to change gender per se? I've asked that question.
I'm so comfortable saying when I don't understand things, because I often think, if I don't understand it, one, you've not explained it clearly enough, or you've not explained it simply enough. And if I don't understand it, do you know what? I also reckon other people won't as well, but nobody's saying it. So I'm really happy to say, look, what? I don't even know what that word means. That is off. You'll hear me saying that in the office. I don't even know what that word means. And then, so we need to simplify this. Let's talk plain language, so we all know, and let's, and I was like, oh, right, okay, Jo, here's a better word. Well, that's way more simple to understand.
No, but exactly, and it's these simple things, because remember, we've got the fight or flight, haven't we?
Yeah, totally.
So that's what we've got, and you know, there's another saying that I have around fear. Fear is real.
Yeah.
Fear doesn't necessarily mean that you've got this huge dinosaur, or for me, a tiny spider, where you just run. And for me, it's like when I talk about fear, we have this thing inside us where you either F everything and run, or you face everything and rise.
Yeah.
And whenever we're in that point of we're not sure, we're confused, we're in fear mode, bring it back to you. Why am I worried about this? What am I trying to get here? You know, when we're in meetings, we have this strength to say, okay, so what are we doing today? And we can present all day long, or we can speak to our partners or speak to our friends. But when it comes to things like this that matter to us, because obviously we're having a conversation, so it must, we somehow forget everything that we've learned. So when you don't know what to say something. Because when you don't say anything, one, you've just walked away maybe with the wrong information. Secondly, you potentially offended somebody and that was not your intention, but they now don't know that. But just have that dialogue. And yeah, go ahead.
What did you think about, so we recently had an example where a number of people put racist comments after the England final on social media, and they were just despicable comments. Nobody can ever, you know, argue other than that. And their organisations got involved. What are your thoughts on that? So somebody in their personal time, but expressing vile views, to be honest, and back to your comment of zero tolerance should be it, on social media, and then their employers got involved. What are your thoughts on that? I know what my thoughts are.
So I was in trauma response of all of that, to be fair.
You were what? Sorry, Nichole.
I was in trauma response when I read all of that, Jo. I was literally in tears. I got kicked off a train. I was on my way to Bognor Regis on the Monday, and I got kicked off the train because of signalling. And I was on the platform full of English supporters, and I was petrified. I was absolutely petrified. And I remember, and at that time, because I'm in lots of community WhatsApp groups, they were putting things in because children were being spat at in certain areas of London. It was a complete, I mean, we literally had to have an emergency meeting about it to try and protect the kids. And I remember just looking at my phone, looking at the people around me who probably, you know, had nothing to do with, but I just sat there and thought, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? It's never gonna, I just couldn't believe it. And what really got me through that week was the organisations that were standing up and stepping up and saying, because the thing is, going back to, you've got individual racism, then you've got your collective racism, so people who talk amongst themselves, then you've got institutional racism, and then you've got systemic, and this goes for all the others. So, but because we're talking about race at the moment and my lived experiences, I'm making it personal to me, right? And the only way we're going to stop any discrimination to anybody is to break down the system and the systemicness of it, and to break down the institutional racism or any discrimination. Organisations have to start looking at their policies and saying, okay, so this isn't something you did at work, but these are the thoughts that you have. If you're a manager and you're recruiting people, for example, how the hell are you going to be objective? How are we saying, because the Equality Act is an act, it's a law, it is actually a hate crime, it's illegal. To treat people in any way, whether it be, you know, regardless, right?
Back to bringing your whole self to work, so you don't have certain thoughts outside of work and they come into work different. Whatever you put on social media at 11 o'clock at night. Exactly.
And for me, going back to wholesale, because we were talking about that earlier, for me, I think when organisations say wholesale, be explicit with anything that you're saying. So I might remember, again, this lady said to me, well, Nichole, my work life and my home life is completely different. And what I bring to work, I'm happy with what I bring to work. I don't want to bring any more of myself. And I said to her, but that's your whole work self. What we're saying is that you have the option to do that. And the fact that you can, as opposed to saying, we're all cloned, we're all the same, you've got to be this. Your skirt has to be a certain level, or you have to wear black and white. I mean, obviously, if it's retail, I understand that. But you see what I'm getting at here. So your whole self should be, I have an option to bring what I want to work. So if it's 5%, to me, that's 5% of my whole self. If it's 100%, I can do that. And that's
a really good example, actually.
if we're going to talk about wholesale, it's around you have the option to be you.
Choose exactly. What your whole self is, you know, in the environment that you're wanting to share. No, I really get that. So, crikey, we've talked about so much. I'm trying to think about how we kind of distill this. So I'm a leader and manager, sat in an organisation, feeling I need to do something. I need to really help me do the right thing. You've talked about, or not saying the wrong thing, you've talked about just have the dialogue. Look at your organisational policies to make sure, you know, we've talked about dialogue, we've talked about zero tolerance, everybody matters. Sharing about inclusivity and belonging, what that means. I suppose a little bit back to my example earlier about, you know, one-to-one at the end of the day or whatever, you know, what does everybody everybody needs. And then about the equity and equality. About it's all right everybody having the right shoes, but if they don't fit, then that's not fair. That is a really good example. So actually making sure that everybody has got the right shoes and that they fit. Are there any other things that you would kind of go, you know what, if there was only one thing I'd be saying to people, it's this, because this is such a important topic, and I certainly feel that you and I could talk all day, because I just think we keep digging out a little bit and going, digging out a little bit more and go, oh, let's have a look, dig. And you're talking at our conference, which I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted, because I know you'll dig more for us, and I know that you'll be busy doing your happy dance on stage, as well as being jumped on probably by all the.
I see what you did there.
I've now got you you need to be practicing this happy dance, Nichole. You'll be doing your happy dance on stage, and people will be asking you questions. I know they will want to just go, oh, Nichole, tell me, give me the answers. What would be the one thing, if you could just solve it all for leaders and managers, helping themselves and their teams to really thrive in the space of inclusive leadership? What is it? What's the magic?
So because there's no magic answer, as you can imagine. No. So if I was gonna talk about self, I would say be honest with yourself.
Great.
You have your own values, your beliefs, your systemic values, your generational beliefs. Be honest with yourself, and that's what coaching does. This is why coaching is so important, because it does take that deeper dive. And if I'm going to talk about organizations, if you're saying that you're doing this piece of work, get the right voices in the room. Don't be talking around gender and it's all men in the room. Don't be talking about mums just coming back to work and it's all, you know, have the right voices in the room. If you don't have those people in your organization, well, that's an alarm bell. So bring a consultant in, bring an expert in to do that work, to train your people to get it right. So you cannot do this work if you're not listening to the people it affects. It doesn't make sense. You cannot be making decisions for people that are not in that room to help to navigate that. And that's really, really important. And that was something that I was massively a part of at the CIPD with the Anti-Racism Hub after George Floyd. Everything that basically went out around race came to us as a group. And we looked at the wording, we looked at the content, we looked at the language, and look at your decision making. So I know you said one thing, but the one thing I would say is that if you're doing this piece of work, please don't be tokenistic, and just make sure you've got the people in the room that know. They're experts at lived experiences. It's important.
And I think that's an absolute gem, because what I often like to do in my world is, no matter what, throughout my career, I've liked, you know, from an empathy perspective, try to put myself in that person's shoes. But can we really do that when we haven't lived the experiences? I'm a white female who's nearly 50. So that's me. Can I truly put myself in somebody else's shoes when I haven't lived those? I've only lived my own experiences, you know, and every individual's experiences are absolutely unique to them. So I'm probably sending us down another rabbit hole, because I could talk to you all day. But so what you're saying is get the right people who've lived it. Don't just get a load of people like me who are trying for their very, very best to put themselves in that person's shoes, when actually, until you've lived it. Is that fair? Yeah,
and again, another rabbit hole, we could talk about cultural appropriation or appreciation.
Okay.
And there's been so much around that. For example, traditional dish in Jamaica is rice and peas and chicken, which is kidney beans and rice, by the way.
Yeah.
We call them peas. and IKEA wanted to do a traditional Jamaican dish. They had a massive picture of the jerk chicken, but they had rice and garden peas. So that was not rice and peas. So if they had the right people in the room, they would have told them.
They'd have put the right peas in the dish.
And that's just a classic example. So the coaching that kind of I've ended up doing, and which I'm loving, is people who are in this space or want to learn more about this space.
Yeah.
But they've got so when I'm coaching somebody privately, they will say, Nichole, I don't know what to say, or I'm really passionate about this, I don't agree with what's going on, or I've got leaders who have now taken this piece of work on and don't know where to go. So that seems to be where my coaching has naturally gone to, is really anybody who's really in the diversity and inclusion space who basically needs that confidence, because it can be a lonely job, because you've been given this role to do, and you're almost uncovering things in your organization, and you've got to now say to your senior leaders, I think we could come across a little bit ageist, or we could come across sexist, or that was actually a racist comment. How does somebody who's never done this role before or been doing it for years have the confidence to steer an organization away from a tokenistic tick box exercise to making real change?
So it definitely feels that you're talking about, education, you're talking about, honesty. You've definitely mentioned that honesty, having that dialogue, education policies, and I suppose processes, but being brave in the not being brave to be honest and have the conversation, saying, look, I don't know, I'm nervous about saying the wrong thing. Right, well, let's talk about that then, because that's actually coming from a positive place. Let's figure that out. And I'll tell you something, Jo, sorry, just quickly, because I know we're probably running out of time, but just two things I wanted to say is, you've just spoken about brave, and I'm a massive advocate of saying brave space, because the V in brave means vulnerability. Yeah. And to be brave, you've got to show vulnerability. Yes. And you're at work. Going back to your wholesale, you may have to show a part of yourself that you didn't negotiate to show in your whole self. Yeah. Because now we're talking about learnt behaviours, which is not work behaviours, etc., etc. Yeah. So there is an element of vulnerability and bravery. But you'll be so surprised when a leader says something to their organisation or to their people, their employees or their people, and somebody will say, do you know what, that was really brave of Jo to actually share that. Yes. And you'll be amazed around the amount of people that will say, I've actually felt the same. It's really, really, really important that we do think about what that brave space looks like. And to show that as leaders, that yes, we're in this together because we're human. Let's remove the labels, because when you start removing that armour, then you get the authenticity. And where do you think we're going then culturally? Obviously, our business is called Coaching Culture. The podcast is called Coaching Culture. And we see coaching as the place where people can be authentic. They can have those effective and honest conversations, and a coaching culture on a large scale, on the system, with leaders and managers having those conversations every single day will really move things forward. But what do you think, Nichole? What's your thoughts? Let's wind forward another 10 years, 20 years. What's the world going to look like in our organisations?
I actually feel that the younger generation are completely different to us. Go on. In terms of, like, my sons, they've got friends from all over the world.
Right, there you go.
And like when I went to school, part of my high school was in Jamaica, but most of my friends were Jamaican. Yep. My son, he's got friends from Afghan, from Congo, from Italy, from Pakistan, from all over. So I think that we are moving to changing hearts and minds and humanity. And I think that organizations are realizing that the silver lining in their organization is to have an inclusive mindset. Yeah. And that it's not, for me, it's not around those labels of the protected characteristics per se. It's around belonging, equity, and equality. It's around, do I feel like I belong? Is there equality in my organization? And do I feel like I'm being treated equitably? I think I said it right.
You did. I think that's brilliant. That's the summary.
Yes, that is it. And just what I wanted to ask you is that when you were talking about you can't walk in people's shoes. Jo, when we met, we just got on straight away. We were really open with each other. Yeah. So you were able to say things to me and I was able to say things to you. I was able to give you my lived experiences and vice versa. Yeah. And that's how we connected. Yes. So it's not really like you've got the difference between sympathy and empathy. Yeah. It's not really around, we're never going to know. Even women who've had children, everyone's labour experience is different. Yes. Yes, we've had a baby at the end of it, but everybody's experience is different. Mental health, etc. Anything else, a happy feeling, what makes you happy. but it's about that understanding and listening. We talk about listening in coaching so much. It's about listening. And for me, put yourself in those shoes to the best that you can. You can watch a movie. I watch E.T. and I still cry. Still cry my eyes out. Honestly, God, it's so emotional. But so I wouldn't worry really around walking in someone else's shoes. But what I would say is refer to self. When I have any of my sessions, I always say, if I say something that triggers you, write it down. Write down, what did I say? How did you feel? And why do you think it made you feel that way? Yes. You don't have to tell me at the end of the session. Many do. But sometimes I use those three things. If something just gets my back up, I try and do a spot check and say, why did that just trigger you?
What drove that? Yeah.
What did that? And so we can stop playing the blame game. And that, again, is psychological safety. Let's take accountability, but feel confident enough to verbalize that and say, do you know what? I actually made a mistake there. Or I'm not as clued up as I thought I was, but how can I be? It does start with self. It has to start with self, Jo. Has to.
It does indeed, and it always does. Wow, we could talk all day. This is a book in the making, because there's so much in there, Nichole, that you could share with the world. And I'm absolutely delighted to have you speaking at our conference, because genuinely, I just think you've got so much to share on this topic. And just even listening to you today, I'm sure so many people have got a lot out of what you've talked about. And like I said, we've uncovered lots of things here, but we could really deep dive into a lot more areas, I think.
Definitely.
But for the here and now, I think you've been absolutely marvelous, as I knew you would,
Thank you.
because you're just so passionate and knowledgeable and fun with it, which is wonderful. And it's definitely a challenging topic. Let's not say that it isn't, because it is, but let's start having that dialogue. And the more conversations like this, the more we get it out there, the better, for sure.
Yeah. And I really want to encourage people who do listen to the podcast to put comments, ask questions, connect with me, ask me what you need, honestly. If something's triggered them as well, please, happy to have that conversation. And if there's more they want to know or just have a conversation, contact me.
So how can they contact you, Nichole?
My best way to contact is LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly. So find you on LinkedIn and make that connection, and let them know they've done it through listening to you on the podcast. Will be lovely.
Yes, that would be good.
Oh, thank you so much, Nichole. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jo. I could talk to you forever, but thank you.
Likewise. Absolutely likewise. Well, everybody, thank you for listening to Nichole today. She's been an absolute fabulous guest, as we knew she would. And if you want to listen to more of our fabulous guests, please do tune into more of our podcasts, because as you know, coaching does matter now more than ever. Thank you.